Hello and welcome to the eighth and final video on the series of the effect of demand shocks on the economy, in particular on employment. In this final video, we want to contrast some of the implications of the model mechanisms with more empirical evidence. So we want to know what the data says and contrast that with the conclusions we're drawing from the model so that we can know if the model is on the right track as a tool for us to interpret what's happening in real life. So the first thing is to go through model predictions. And so when we think of model predictions for non-tradable employment, we see that the model predicts that it always declines regardless of whether prices are flexible or not. It is still the case that if you are a county that are harder hit by a demand shock, then the change in employment for the non-tradable sector should also be larger. But we already know that is the case. In our video on the data section, we devoted a lot of time to prove that in fact the relationship between changes in net worth and changes in non-tradable employment are not only robust but causal, so that we can interpret from these graphs that in effect, as net worth decreases more across counties, non-tradable employment also decreases more. And that's an important part of the data that talks directly to the type of answers to the results we're getting in the model. Then what about tradable employment? Well, we find out from the model that the reaction of tradable employment depends on the flexibility of prices. If prices are flexible, total employment is not affected. That means there is full employment. Everybody has a job. And so tradable employment can even go up. But tradable employment goes down for sure if prices are fixed. Not only that, this is the important bit, the model also predicts that tradable employment declines uniformly across counties. That means all the counties have the same decline in tradable employment, regardless of them being hard hit or not by the recession shock. And we can check that. What we want to measure is in the data, what is the correlation between the change in tradable employment and the change in housing net worth. That's a regression like the one that we write over here at the top, where we have the percentage change in employment approximated with the change of the log as a function of the change in housing net worth. The result is very evident from the graphs that we're seeing. Even though tradable employment is decreasing on average, there is no systematic relationship between the change in housing net worth and how large the change in tradable employment is. And that's something that's important because it is telling us that the world seems to look more like a world where prices are fixed at the time of the recession than a world where during the recession prices can adjust. And as we started the presentation with the motivation, the decrease in employment is fairly large across all the US. And so we kind of expected from the model that we can better approximate that large decrease in employment, that increase in unemployment as well, with a model where prices are fixed and markets do not clear during the recession. Here, what we're seeing is the results from the regression. We see that the correlation between the change in employment and the change in housing net worth is zero, regardless of how we are identifying the tradable industry, either by the amount of trade they have or their geographical concentration. And the way we interpret this constant being relatively zero is that there is no relationship. However, the constant alpha, that's going to be the average change in employment, is negative and significant. So tradable employment does decline, but it does it uniformly regardless of the size of the housing shock. So that's going to be something that's going to give us some more confidence when interpreting the results of the model. The final thing I want to talk about is a missing link in the story we've been telling. Because in the model, we're trying to say that a decrease in housing net worth can be interpreted as a decrease in demand. we haven't actually shown any direct evidence that this is the case. We just have said that arguably, if there is a decreasing housing net worth, there is going to be a negative wealth effect that should decrease demand. We haven't really shown it. The second paper that we were looking at in the first slide, it's actually filling that gap. The critical element is going to be the elasticity of demand to housing net worth. And so Mian and Sufi in their 2013 paper actually provide that elasticity. And by using that elasticity, we can get that the elasticity of non-tradable employment with respect to spending directly, it's actually quite large. 0.5%, it's a very sensible number for how much employment changes when demand is changing. Now, I want to give you just a sense of how Mian and Sufi get to do this because I actually find it very interesting. They are going to gather data at the zip code or county level for a series of variables that are important for us. Of course, they have housing net worth, especially house prices and debt. These are the same variables that we were using in the paper we've been discussing. But then they're going to join these with auto sales, so sales of cars, and the total number of new automobiles sold across each of these zip codes of counties. That's very important because auto sales are a good indicator of how strong demand is, how strong consumption is. But they do more than this because they got access to MasterCard sales data, which gives them the total consumer purchases in a county that are using either a credit card or a debit card with MasterCard. That is very rich data that lets them say exactly and in real time how much consumption is changing, knowing it directly from the processing of credit and debit card payments. As an aside, starting with the COVID pandemic in 2020, there is going to be a big effort by many economists to try to use data like credit card data as a source of having real-time measurements of how strong demand is in different parts of the economy. If you're interested in this type of data and the conclusions that you can draw from it, you can contact me or look up the research of Rash Chetty from Harvard. He's one of the main researchers working with this type of data. At any rate, the objective here is to use this data on consumption, either from auto sales or from credit card data, to get at the MPC of consumption out of wealth. So how much is consumption changing when the housing net worth of agents is changing? What they find, of course, is the elasticity that we saw at the beginning. And so to conclude, we cover a paper by Atif Mian and Mian Sufi that establishes the effect of a decreasing housing net worth on employment. In order to be able to disentangle this effect from other shocks, they exploit cross-country variation in the data across tradable and non-tradable industries. This distinction between tradable and non-tradable industries is important because both theoretically and intuitively, the effect of demand shocks is going to be different across these two sectors. The bottom line of what they find is that counties with a larger decrease in housing net worth experience a larger drop in non-tradable employment. And just to put numbers on it, a 1% decrease in net worth reduces employment by 0.5%. This can be very significant because during crisis, net worth can go down substantially, as we saw in the graphs in the motivation in the first video of this series. With this, we finish the second module. Thanks for your attention.